Okay, so once again, we're just after 1 o'clock. So you're all very welcome to day 4 of PastureBase Week 2023, the ultimate grazing preparation and the ultimate PastureBase preparation for grazing 23. Today on the topics for today, for day 4, we were going to talk about a little bit about now, kind of suppose following on from yesterday on the rotation on the rotation planners. So we've talked about the wedge, completing those 30 to 35 walks during the year, and the wedge really, is the key thing for the summer. But we're going to have a quick look at the rotation planners and how they can help or aid with the grazing at the shoulders of the year. And then the grass budget or the feed budget is also a very popular tool, especially for the heavier stock farmer in terms of trying to map out grazing in the spring and autumn of the year. We're then also going to I suppose lead into tomorrow's session on nutrient management in clover with an introduction on the soil sampling page. So again, anyone that's got soil samples done this winter, we're going to show you how to get those soil samples into PastureBase and how then down the line there that you can compare the soil samples to what nitrogen and slurry, nitrogen in the form of slurry and chemical in, and then how that results then in grass growth. Okay, and again, I said that links into tomorrow's session on more on nutrient management. Okay, so just once again before we get going, so just to show you where we've had loads of questions coming in about how to watch back some of the videos, and maybe a few people had to go early because of work and were late getting on. Okay, so all the recordings are going to be here in one place. So again, homepage over to Teagasc Grass10 and Grass10 on the left hand side of the page, webinar subheading, and the webinars are there. So we have the webinar from Monday, and Tuesday's webinar is up there as well. Okay, so 2 webinars already up, and the one for Wednesday will be up tomorrow, and then all 5 will be here on the completion of the week. So by Monday, all 5 webinars should be there in that one spot, okay, for you to watch back in your own time. Just one other thing to remind is the Q&A. The Q&A box is there on the bottom left hand corner of your screen. So again, it's been brilliant the last 3 days. There's been loads of questions that have come in over the hour of the webinar. So again, feel free to pop anything in today that you feel you might require an extra bit of assistance on. Okie doke. So when we talk, as I said already, we focused a good bit on the summer wedge, all right, and completing those 30 to 35 walks during the year. You get a huge amount of information on the farm, but really bringing that we call it the shoulder management, to the next level, okay, and that's where the rotation planners or the grass or the feed budget come into play. So in that springtime when you're doing your when you have low growth rates, but next thing demand is increasing on farm all the time. The wedge is a good picture, but for those few weeks with lower growth rates, and maybe you're having to, rather than eating all the cake at once, you're trying to map out that bit of grazing, and the rotation planner can help to do that. And then the grass and the feed budget is a little bit more in detail about how you're going to do that. So again, just remember rotation, feed budget, shoulders of the year, work in conjunction with the completing a farm walk. And then, as we discussed yesterday, then the wedge then is the key thing over the summer. So if you were able to use rotation planners, a feed budget, and then the summer wedge, like that's what myself and John would see as the key tools in terms of managing your grass year. Okay. So, and again, this is just to look back at some of the research and, I suppose coming on from the wedges, why do we extend grazing? Okay. And, if we look at the typical growth curve there throughout the year, obviously it starts off in the green bar there ahead of you. That green bar, like, it obviously starts off quite slow in the spring, builds to a peak. Okay. and then you know, dips off then in the back end. But obviously there's a fairly large demand in the springtime and the autumn time, depending on stock rate on the farm. So by extending the grazing season, if you can see there, with you know, the stocking rate with grazing season length, by being able to extend grazing into the shoulders of the year, you know, we're getting probably €2.70 per cow per day in the springtime. Okay, by doing a good job, as I said yesterday, that your autumn management dictates your following spring, you know, the following spring, what's on the farm. So we'll have probably €2.70 per cow per day, or probably €2 per livestock unit, okay, on dry stock farms. And then when we come to the autumn as well, you know, we're probably looking at €1.80 per cow per day and €2 per livestock unit. Okay, and they're what I call old money, like, you know, as in, you know, when costs weren't as high, and maybe milk price wasn't as high. So that figure could be well up as far as €4 this year per cow per day. So it's just something to after. So it's worth, you know, these rotation planners can make an awful difference. Okay, and every day of grass has a real impact on farm profit. Extra days in autumn is achieved by, remember what we were saying yesterday about building that farm cover, building a cover by extending the rotation, extending the rotation length, and building that peak cover up to, you know, whatever it is for your farm. Maybe if it's a heavy farm, you might only build to maybe 900 and something. Maybe a dry farm with very good grazing infrastructure, you might build to over 1100. And then every day in the spring is driven by that opening cover, and that's from the previous autumn. Okay, so look, at just for 30 seconds is all we're going to stop it there for. I just want to get a little bit of involvement from, you know, we've got big numbers on again today, which is super. What factors influence the days spent at grass? Okay, we kind of have mentioned a few of them there, but if you want to just put into the chat box there, what factors do you think, you know, be it from the farmer side, be it, you know, from what's out in the paddock, what influences days spent at grass? So if you want to just put in the comment box there. We have a load coming in there so far, John.
Yeah, there's a few coming in there. The weather, rainfall, stocking rate. Water, I suppose that's maybe to do with temperatures, maybe. Yeah, so
we can give another 10 or 15 seconds for a few people.
Yeah.
Access and roadways there, yeah.
There's a lot of weather, and I suppose weather does play a big role, but we also have an influence on it as well, I suppose, and that's what we're trying to achieve, I suppose, with today, to show that, you know, when you have a plan in place and you have the right infrastructure in place, that you can overcome some of the weather effects. Okay, because weather, you know, even within the same parish last year on same soil conditions, they both got the same weather, but maybe one farm was out grazing for a lot of days and one farm wasn't. Okay, so there's a lot to do with, you know, a bit of mindset as well. Okay, so it's up to us to take a bit of responsibility for what's going on as well, and just posing yourself the question: is there something more that I could be doing to get animals out? Obviously, if it's saturated, you know, things aren't looking in your favor, well, then there's not much you can do. But there is days there that are a little bit touch and go, and if you have the right mindset, they're the days that the farmers that we would see that are getting cows out, that's when they're getting them out. You know, they're getting them out for maybe 2 or 3 or 4 days, you know, even for 3 or 4 hours every day, and they're eating into that money that Joe's highlighted there. You know, they're gaining from that every day that they're doing that. Okay, so like you can have soil type, ground conditions, north or south facing, weather. A lot of those things, they are outside of control. You're not going to change a whole lot unless you move to a different climate. But there's a lot of things that we can do as well. Sorry, Joe.
You know, I was just saying that's what, you know, I suppose the green box there is after coming up on the screen in front of you, and look, a good few of those were, you know, covered in the chat. So thanks everyone for contributing. Yeah. But again, like, still at the end of the day, you know, soil type and weather completely out of our control. But if we look at all the ones underneath that, the stock rate on the farm is the farmer's control. You know, measuring and having the correct farm covers for your farm at the different times of the year is completely in your control. That having a rotation plan or a budget to get you through that, you know, spring, completely in your control. You know, having the correct grazing infrastructure and you know, correct grazing infrastructure is, you know, extremely important on dry farms. You know, and then, you know, even on heavier soils as well, very, very important, because that might be the difference of maybe getting out for those few hours that we were talking about. And look at, you know, you don't need me to tell you, you know, if you can get out and if you get out in spring, and if it's only for a few hours, the peace of mind, you know, in terms of the, you know, seeing a shed empty, you know, even for, you know, a couple of heifers getting out, you know, getting out grazing, and a couple of early calvers getting them out, you know, just having that time to maybe line cubicles, or, you know, clean a shed and push in silage without stock being in the yard. Like it's a huge ease, and it's great. It's great for your own mindset too. But and then the last one, the farmer mindset, is that we always say we're dealing with an awful lot of groups, and sometimes, as John said, we could have two people with very similar land types, but it's just that mindset that, okay, I'm going to go grazing when I see that break in the weather, and I know, well, maybe the ground is soaked a little bit, I know where my go-to areas are on the farm. So again, there's two there. There's two examples there of, you know, things that soil type and weather are completely out of our control, but there's numerous other things we can do that's inside our own control. And I suppose, look at for today's webinar, we're mainly going to focus on the rotation plans and the budget, just to, you know, to how we can manage that the shoulders of the year that little bit better. So just, I suppose, from the rotation planner point of view, you know, and I suppose just on that days of grass as well, is, you know, I suppose back to the old adage, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Like, you know, when we talk about there's going to be, you know, animals in general going to be happier out at grass as long as it's not absolutely, you know, dumping rain on them, like, or, you know. So every additional week at grass reduces the greenhouse gas emissions by 1%. Okay, so again, the slurry isn't being, you know, they're spreading their own manure. You know, so it doesn't have to be it's not being collected. Okay, so there's greenhouse gas emissions, and the same thing on the beef side of things. Every 10 days of grass reduces greenhouse gases by 1%. So just an important point to mention too. All right. So again, a spring rotation planner, okay, again, can be, as we're going to look at it now in a minute on PastureBase, but, you know, can be as, you know, it's quite a simple plan at the end of the day. All right, you know, there's not really much to it. And just for this example here on the screen, okay, what we've done is we've a farm of 40 hectares. Okay, so as we said yesterday in maybe some of the key targets, you know, we're looking at pretty much for a first third, second third, and then you know, in around second third, or somewhere between 60 and 66%, and then we're looking at when we want to be fully grazed by. So look at, in this example here, we're going to look at 40 hectares in a fairly dry farm, and someone with a turnout date of, you know, the first week of February. Okay, so this is very much just splitting it up, that our 30% graze would be somewhere in around the last week of February. Okay, so that we're going to have 12 hectares grazed by that point. Okay, then the next third then, or just a little bit shy of third, 60% grazed. The you know, probably the 10 to 15 somewhere in around Paddy's weekend, to have maybe 60 or 66%, 2/3 grazed. Okay, so that's then 60% of that would be 24 hectares altogether, and then, you know, the remainder then to be grazed off over, you know, from that time until you start your second rotation. Okay, and again, you know, maybe you're that little bit later calving. Okay, maybe you're not getting animals out maybe till the 10th or something like that, you know, and maybe heavier soils that maybe aren't getting out until the middle or 20th of February, or maybe a little bit later. You know, we're probably in general still going to need 60 days. So it's about how you manage that rotation. So again, just a good guide, if you have 40 hectares, you know, have a 30% target. You know, when you want to get maybe some lighter covers grazed off, fields with decent grazing infrastructure, then, you know, 60% grazed, you know, you're probably looking at, you know, at some ground to with maybe some slightly bigger paddocks, maybe because you're going to have more animals to go later on in that, maybe that next area of grazing there, in that early March period. Okay. And then, for example, the latter part of March and into April, you're slowing your animals down with some heavier covers while you're waiting for those paddocks that were grazing early February or February to be back to having the 1300-1400 on them that we want at the start of the second rotation. Okay. So again, a good guide to have, again, as we said, probably 60 days, 60, 65 days. And again, this is where the budget comes into play as well here, and we'll get seen about in a few minutes. But, all this, no 2 years are the same. And look at, you all know well that from the last few years, weather has been quite different every year. There's been droughts, wet periods. Some months have been very wet, some months very dry. And, it's not about making a plan like this and absolutely sticking to it and then turn around and saying, oh, Joe Dunphy and John Douglas told me to stick to this and it was going to revolutionize everything, and it didn't, and I ran out of grass. It's about having a plan in place at a few key points during the year, during your springtime. Maybe review it, how we go, and maybe how have I more cows calved, have I more area grazed, and that might be the difference. Maybe putting in an extra bit of silage or an extra bit of meal, or trying to get maybe extra grass growth there in terms of tactically using your fertilizer and slurry well, during February and March this year. Okay. And trying to get a bit of to get better grass growth on those early paddocks that are grazed. Okay, so just something to be aware of. Okay, so I'm just going to stop.
While you're doing that, Joe, there's just a question in there from John. He said, when would you let out light stock full time for grazing? Okay, and I suppose, look, there's no straight answer to that, John. We have some farmers in some parts of the country let out that type of stock towards the end of January, and they might have to bring them back in for certain weeks or for certain days, but they try and keep them out a low number. We're not like talking about all of them, maybe just a pen or a couple of pens out to grass. But again, that's relying on that you have the grass there. That obviously, there's a few days ahead, I suppose, of grazing without it going to be teeming rain, and they're well set up for that. If things do change, the weather changes quickly. Each paddock maybe is beside a roadway, and it's just a quick case of letting them run back in the shed before they get wet, and that works quite well. I even know one or two farmers that let cattle some light stock out during the day, and again, they're well set up with grazing infrastructure. They let them out during the day, and it's basically cutting down halving their silage requirement for February until they get out then full time in March. So they're saving that way. So there's no real right answer to that, but like it can be from any time, probably from late January onwards, on drier farms.
I would agree with that, and it all depends on the setup on the farm. As in, if you have to go trailer animals to an out farm, like there's no way you're going to do that in January or probably early February, because if maybe you're working as well, or maybe say for instance, if you're part-time farming and you're not, because you won't have the time to bring them back if the weather goes to pot for a few days, or else maybe you're calving cows and you want to bring heifers to an out farm. It's realistically not going to happen. So it involves, maybe if you have, we'll call it on a dry stock scenario, if you've 7 or 8 paddocks around the shed with a decent roadway that you could kind of maybe run them back in, that's maybe where you're going to let out that bit earlier. Maybe over the east of the country that bit earlier. Maybe taking a few days in February, or if you're over on the west coast, where you tend to get a little bit more weather. But again, it all depends on the setup on the farm. Okay, there's no one answer. It all depends on your grazing infrastructure that you have.
We're not talking about big elaborate 4-meter wide roadways with stone on them. A lot of these roadways, they're just grass roadways.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and they will get a bit mucky this time of year if they're stock running up and down them, but they're grass roadways, So
an old track along a ditch or something like that. And it's only a question then that, the key thing is that if you could run out and you knew there was 3 or 4 very wet days coming, that you go out and open a gap and let them back in again. And even if that's staying for a week or 10 days, they've done some grazing and they've saved you a few bales, so it's something to look out for. Okay, so just back to the grass bud, the rotation planner. So again, back into the demo account that we've had the last few days. So down here on the left hand side, down to rotation planners. And today we're really just going to focus on the spring planner. Okay, so spring rotation planner. It's also available up here on the right hand side of the dashboard. So you'll see here on the top, you'll see all the spring rotation plans that you've done down through the last few years. So just come to the area here. So you just have a spring plan, and put whatever name you want on it. The area. Okay, so say for instance, there's a paddock there that's it's a swamp in the springtime. You don't get into it at all. Or it's a field, maybe the very far end of the farm that you put heifers to or something like that, it's not on the grazing rotation, for that point of the springtime, you could take out, say, paddock 11, 2.5 hectares, you could take that out along the way. All right. When you're starting grazing, okay, say for instance, you're starting, we'll call it this, say for instance, you're calving the first week of February, and you're getting out maybe somewhere, maybe towards the end of that first week of February there, maybe the 9th, you can put that in there, and then we can go along to April, and maybe your target maybe somewhere in around the 10th of April then, okay, to end that first rotation. Okay, and then you just be going and you'll be hitting save there. So I'm just gonna cancel out of that there. I'm not going to create another one because I've just one created there. As some of the cookery experts, something I prepared a little bit earlier. So so if we just go into this one here, so start a grazing the 6th and then ending somewhere in around the 9th of April. So that's what he said here. Spring plan, 30 hectares, 6th of the 2nd, 23, and starts the second round 9th to the 4th, 2023. Okay, so what that has done here is it's kind of given me hectare targets by the end of the week. All right, and all the way through the spring. So again, in around 30% or somewhere in around 30% hit there by the end of the first, in around the first week of March. Your 2/3 graze there somewhere in around the week of the 20th. Okay, and then in around the end of that first week of April, hitting your second rotation. Okay, and I suppose this is where, as we talked about, those regular grass walks, when you put in your grazing events and do a cover, the actual hectares grazed come in here. So it's a nice thing to see. Say for instance, here along the way, you get 10 days of disastrous weather in February, and you're coming back in here and you're seeing, you're meant to be at 12% and you actually have only a paddock or 2 graze and you're still down, in low digits. Well, then it's going to be in the back of your mind there that there's no point in me targeting to be finished the first rotation, unless you get super growth at the end of the March. You might need to push, say for instance, you're targeting the 3rd or 4th of April to be finished your first rotation. Like that you might need to think in the back of your head, right, maybe I'm going to need to extend this out because, there's no way I'm not getting enough grazed in February to get back into those fields that quick. So you'll be able to see the actual hectares grazed by weekend, and then it'll come in the targets. It'll have this updated along the way. And for people there that like it a little bit more visual as well, the target farm cover, if you have a budget done, will come in here, and then the actual farm cover will come in here in blue along with the predicted farm cover. So in general, we like to open with we're calling 900 plus on the farm. So, and then we want to manage that down to maybe somewhere around 600, 550 and no lower in that, early April time. Okay. So it should be a controlled, controlled grazing, that we still have 550, 600 in, you know, the first couple of weeks of April. So the farm is in that position to grow. All right. You know, it has, you know, it's not all, it's not, we're not tanking the farm to 450, you know, or 400 of cover, because that just, it just means that it's too hard to get started. Okay. So again, you can toggle with all these if you want, but and again, I said this is only a guide. This is not going to be bang on every year, but it's good to have targets, you know, and trying to maybe areas that you want to graze throughout the springtime. Okay. So moving on from the spring rotation planner, again, as I said, very, very simple. There's not a huge amount to it. Okay.
Sorry, Joe, I got knocked off there. I'm back in. I hope I didn't miss anything.
No, you're all right. You're not so bad. We missed you. We missed you there for a few minutes, John. Okay, so back out to the home page again. Okay, so, and as we said already, rotation planner is covered. We're going to come into the grass budget. Okay, and what also is here is a fodder budget. All right, that you know for the winter time, you know, if you, it's no harm to do one. Okay, but you know, and you can put in all the stock you have, complete a fodder budget, and you know it's handy to have. Okay, so again. Similar to the home, I suppose, the home page for the spring rotation planner. Again, a name for the feed budget, how many hectares you want to use, a start date and an end date. So your start date, you know, in general, maybe that this might be a little bit further. You might go a little bit longer, as in maybe you might go a few weeks into April with it, and maybe you might start your feed budget maybe around the time that you do your opening farm cover. Okay, you put your farm cover in at the start, and another one here is maybe the region to use. Okay, so this is for growth rates, okay, because the budget is it's more live, if you want to call it, than the spring rotation planner. Okay, and it may, you know, there's growth rates coming into it as well. If you have a number of years of accurate growth rates, you can use My Farm. Okay, because if you're constantly doing, you know, say 2 walks in February, 1 in January, 2 in February, a couple in March, and then you're doing 3 or 4 in April, and you're doing that over 4 or 5 years, the PastureBase will have a good bit of information for you on the farm, as opposed to just using more generalized information for the different provinces. Okay, so again, but if you're new to it, and say for instance you're from Galway or Mayo, you know, use Connacht, you know, and if you're from, you know, other areas, Cork, Tipperary, you know, you just use whatever province is necessary. Okay, and then, you know, whatever stock is on your, that you're aiming to do it for, like in general, you know, it's kind of mainly for the higher stock farmers. We're going to do it from a spring milker's point of view here. Okay, so you just click, you untick the lactate ewes that are there, and just click spring milkers. All right. So again, into the budget that we've done. Okay, so I know there's a good bit to hear, but we're going to walk through this fairly lively.
Will you just move in your menu there, Joe, on the left-hand side there, just to close it in? The black menu list there, just make the screen a bit bigger.
That one, is that okay?
You know, where it says dashboard and farm and stuff like that, just to...
Dashboard. Oh, sorry, hear you. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, sound. So when you come into a feed budget, okay, what you're going to see here first, okay, before we even start, is as long as we have our opening farm cover done and we have recorded, we know where we are. Okay, so in this example, I've put in 990, so just nearly 1,000 cover of farm. So that's our first week, the 30th of January 2023. Okay, we've 30 hectares, we have the land right. Okay, now the next thing probably to put in is if you're calving, okay, and this is really where, you know, I suppose having a bit of extra technology, the likes of Herd Watch and Herd App, Okay, in this example here, this farmer has 90 cows on 30 hectares, three livestock units to the hectare. Okay, if you go into on herd app, if you go in, you'll see, or herd watch, you'll have the information on how many cows are calving on what week of the coming season. Okay, so for the coming calving season. So it'll give you, say, by the end of the end of the the end of, say, the first, we call it the first to the first to the eighth. It'll have, there's going to be 20 animals calving that week, 10 heifers and 10 cows. The next week there might be more heifers, but it will total up, based, if you have the calving details, the breeding details in and the scanning details incorrect, that information is going to be in. Okay, so that's going to, so for this example, this is what, roughly 90% calving in 6 weeks. And I'm just, for this example, I put in that by the third or the fourth, we're going to have all 90, out of 90 calved. Next thing is, I have this cow's calving, because it's important to remember that when it's not just a question of, I'm going to offer all these cows 18 kilos, okay, straight away from a feed budget. I have to set the feed intake, because we know well that after calving, intakes are, very, very low on cows, and then again step low even with heifers again. And again, in most herds, it's probably 15, 20, and especially younger herds, it could be 25%, 30% heifers in it. Okay, so it's something to because it's not, if you go putting in large intake figures from the start, it's not going to be that realistic. So we want to have this as realistic as possible. So set feed intake here. Okay, so in general, we know probably a cow is probably starting somewhere week 1 after calving of about 12.5 kilos of intake, and roughly going up a kilo a week after that. Okay, so for this example, 12.5, 13.5, 14.5, and then 15, 16, 17, 18, working our way up towards 18 now, and that could be 19 kilos for some cows. But again, and that's why some cows, that's why in general, and we, myself and John, get an awful lot of questions. Say for instance, I think my cows are eating more, or a certain proportion of my cows are doing 2.x kilos milk solids, or I think they're doing more. But you always have to remember that there's probably 20% heifers in the herd that are probably starting off somewhere about 9.5 kilos. So if they're getting 3 kilos of meal in the parlour and another couple of kilos of silage, their intakes are actually very, very low, like in the single digits. Okay, so something to be aware of. Okay, so having the intakes. So what PastureBase is doing in the background is that as I add in 8 further ones onto this week, they're putting those that difference of 8 at 12.5 kilos. So, and then I'm adding, say, I'm up to 45, I'm up to 52, 65, 72, 82, okay? And the intakes are changing there in the background all the time, okay? So what this is telling me here is these amount of cows will be calved at every week throughout the springtime. I have 990 kilos of grass on the farm, but if I look down here down the line, all of a sudden I'm back to 136 kilos of grass here on the 4th of April. And that should send, I suppose, an alarm off in your head that Joe Dunphy and John Douglas warned me to never let my farm cover go under 550. All right, and why is that happening? And again, it's probably because this farmer in particular is coming to a stocking rate of in around 3, and he's pretty much trying to do that all from grass. Okay, so we know that's not possible. John, that figure from Brendan Horn on the self-sufficiency, if you want to go grass only, that you mentioned the other day?
Yeah, I think it was to have a farm cover somewhere between 900 and 1,000 if you're stocked, somewhere like 2.3, 2.4, 2.5. That's where you need to sort of be. So
if you're to go grass only, so
yeah, grass and meal, right,
yeah.
just in case someone picks me up wrong.
Yeah. No, and that just shows you. So maybe at that, that those higher stock rates, 3 and above, like there has to be, supplementation at the shoulders along with correct, sustainable use of fertilizers at the targeted points of the springtime to get grass moving on these farms when we get the correct soil temperatures and the correct weather conditions. So this farmer is telling me I'm going to feed 3 kilos. Okay, I'm going to feed 3 kilos of meal for pretty much most of the springtime. Okay, so very simply, I'm going to put meal intakes at 3 kilos. Okay, so again, as you saw there, it's reducing the intakes over here on the left of grass. Okay, and then I'm going to hit update. Okay, so in this example of 3 kilos of meal, my farm cover is, probably at, in around 450 here at the start of April, 553. It's just getting a little bit low, okay, but it's controllable here on this in this scenario, because the reason is I'm probably building to over 1,000 of opening farm cover. And with the way the growth rates are on this now, they might be, they're probably in around just about okay, maybe a little bit high at certain points. But in general, you know, it's coming down fairly well in terms of the amount of cows I'm calving there. Okay, so what this may require is maybe there's a kilo or two of silage coming in here, or maybe 2 kilos of silage at night here or something like that. Then, maybe out into, we'll call it into March, maybe we're getting a little bit more steady graze, and there's not much silage going in, and we'll update that again. And I said this is only a guide, all right. We're up to 495, so we need a little bit more. We need more silage, so I'm going to continue with a couple of kilos of silage that they're getting all throughout March. Okay, so as you can see there, we're at 583 in early April. Okay, so I would call that as controlled grazing for the springtime. We're probably coming down 50, and some weeks we're coming down maybe 100 a week, 870 back to 800, down to 685, down to 583. Okay, but our predicted growth rates are starting to come up here from early April. They could be 25, coming up maybe to 30 as we move through the early weeks of April. Okay,
the goal is to see out to the second round. So like when you look back at that slide that you showed, Joe, in the springtime, where that deficit is there, and you're trying to wait for grass growth to meet your demand for grass on the farm, there is a deficit there. Some of that is the reason why we want farm covers to be up, on drier farms probably over 1,000, and on heavier farms maybe somewhere like around 900 or something like that, opening in the spring, or even 8 to 900 we'll say. And that's to feed that deficit and to match up with growth. If you have higher stocking rates, Joe says, you will have to feed more.
Yeah.
And the silage, like the meal, is probably a given. Whether it's 3, 4, 5 kilos, that'll depend farm. The silage there that has to go in, like Joe has put it down as 2 kilos every week, but like that, or 2 kilos every day. But like that could literally, you could be out grazing 5 days of the week, and 2 days might be in at night because they're wet or something like that, and that's when they get their silage. Yeah, the silage requirement, like when it goes in, is not that relevant when you're doing the plan, because the weather will dictate that more, I think. So it's more important to actually maybe know, I suppose, through that feed summary there, like you're given an idea of how much you will need. And that's probably more important, especially this spring, where open and farm covers seem to be behind last year. And there also could be tighter supplies of silage in the yard. Okay, so that's just something to bear in mind.
Yeah, and I think, as John perfectly said there, it's not about this 2 kilos of silage. That could be 6 for a night. But the key thing is what we're trying to do here is and again, it's coming back to what we said about the spring rotation planner. PastureBase, when you do your weekly walks, there throughout, you do a couple in February, and then you're going back a few more in March. The actual farm cover comes in along here, and actual growth rates come in. Okay, so if you're down here on the 6th of March at 700 or 6 something, well that, Jesus, like, I need to watch myself here, and that I'm not going to tank this farm cover too much. Maybe I remember there a couple of years ago, we had a super first couple of weeks of March, and people had 900 here, and they were nearly removing 120, 130 of an average farm cover every week, because it was full tilt grazing, and then they were down at 4 something here, and they spent the whole of April trying to catch up. So again, we're trying to keep this as simple as possible. Okay, I know there's a little bit of work into this, and if you're new to the budget, it can be a little bit daunting at the first time, but
it's probably a case of, Joe, the way in the back end where we would talk about, get your 60% close and then start to watch average farm cover. It's a little bit the opposite here. It's like, get through the first third of your farm and then start worrying more about the average farm cover. As long as your average farm cover is starting from somewhere relatively okay and not below 500, where you're like, I might as well nearly just, I could tip away with it maybe a few hours when the weather's right in February, but I'm not going to do a whole lot. If your farm cover is anyway decent, get through that area first, and then probably that's where you'd be looking at slowing them up.
Yeah,
Because we're trying to, keep and tying in with the spring rotation plan. The reason we want like that first third grazed early is to have grass back for the second rotation. So farms that get more grazed early on, they have more grass ready for the second round, and that's when you have peak intakes coming with cows, and that's when breeding starts, and that's when cows reach their peak dry matter intakes, and also I suppose milk yield as well coming into that period.
Yeah. So it's a very important time, and the last thing we want to have is people 2 or 3 weeks out from breeding eating 800 and 900 kilos, cows being restricted, the plain and nutrition after, and then we're wondering why we're having poor conception rate at first service. That's just a dairy example. So if we keep that figure above 550 all the time, 600, okay, it's going to ensure that April runs slightly more smoothly on a farm. Okay. Last 2 points, John, before we move over. Just one other thing to this feed summary button here. Okay, so this is going to put in that it's going to give a summary of what the meal and the silage and grass that you're in that budget plan that's there for the year. So you can plan there, for instance, in that example, it's not going to be perfect, because that's going to change. There might be with days that you're in that maybe you might go up a little bit in the meal, or maybe you pull the meal a little bit earlier in March. But in general, there's about 11 ton of meal that has to be fed in that budget, and about 4 ton of dry matter silage. So again, the 220 a bale there, you can do the maths on that there, how many bales of silage you're going to need to get you through that spring period. So I know well there I need X amount of good quality bales, and I need 11, 12 ton of meal. So I need a couple of binfuls, depending on the size of your bin, a couple of binfuls of meal to get me through the springtime. Again, so it's only a rough guide. Okay, but again, very much so worth doing. Okay, especially for the higher stock farmers. Okay, and I'm just going to show very quickly before we move over, John, because I'm watching the time here.
Yeah. Just while you're doing that there was a question in about the autumn milkers, if there was 2 herds basically. So when Joe was setting up that budget, he was able to select which stock went into the budget. So you can add new stock. So if it might come up automatically for you in your pasture-based spring milkers, you can add new stock and select autumn milkers. And basically you might go back into that, Joe, and just show where people will change that in a second. Or I can show whatever when I share the screen. But yeah, so actually I can just point it out there. See where it says spring milkers in the box on the PowerPoint. If you just if that was live there now, you could click that box basically, and because you have 2 types of stock, it will bring up the page for the autumn calvers, and all you would do then is where it says spring milkers, it would say autumn milkers, and you would just set their grass and meal and silage intakes off that. Now it still works off the one farm cover, the one farm area, and the growth is the same. So the only thing you're really doing is breaking up your herd into two mobs basically, and putting in what their feed demand is. So it is a little bit, it's a little bit more complicated, but then sure, having 2 mobs is more complicated though. So there you go.
And they could be, you can change their feed intakes that they could be 18, 19 kilos from we'll call it the 9th of Jan, the first week of January there.
Yeah.
So this is just to show a farmer 160 cows who stocked that little bit higher. So he stocked at 3.4 livestock units to the hectare. Okay. And I suppose it's just to show that, I suppose the last scenario, this farmer is going to need more silage and meal to get him through that spring period. Okay. So in general here, there was 4 kilos of meal going in all through the springtime. And what this farmer said to me is that I like when cows are calving to graze that bit harder in February, very, very dry farm. And he says, then when I get a good few cows calved, he says, I prefer to put the bit of feed in later on in March, as John was saying, just to slow that down and to get him through the first rotation. So he said he had no problem going to 4 and 4 or 5 and 4, 5 a meal and 4 silage for those for those few weeks, those middle weeks of March, to hold that farm cover, because with the higher demand, you're under pressure. And in that example there, it was 12 ton of meal the last time. In this example, it's 36 ton of meal. All right. And there's more silage going in. There's 23 ton of silage going in. Okay. So it just goes to show as you start going over 3, the more important it is to do a spring budget. And then the more that the farm isn't, I will call it self-sufficient. Okay. The more and more, as John said, we could probably get through at 2.3, 2.4. You can pretty much get away with maybe a bit of meat, grass and meal. But as we're go up in the stocking rate, there's more and more meal and silage going in to get you through that spring period. Okay. And pasture base can
And it
help you to do.
also shows the open farm cover, Joe, how important that is.
Yeah, yeah, having on this example, he's at 776. Okay, probably he reckons that by this was from the 9th of January, but he still says by the time he gets to the 6th with 5 or 6 kilos of growth, these weeks, especially with soil temperatures being low now, it's probably somewhere in around that. He's only going to get to 922, where he thought maybe he'd have 1,050 at this time of the year. So you add up 1,000 and you add up on 150 kilos of dry matter of grass over a 46 hectare milking platform. It adds up to a lot of to a lot of feed. Okay, so again, they were just an addition on, I suppose they're an addition on to the spring rotation planner and the budgets. Okay, they give more, give people a plan, especially for farmers that are just a little bit more higher stocked. Again, spring rotation planner is a guide. The budget is more of a, we'll call it an A plus tool, because it's taken in multiple facets. It's taken in and it gives you, you're able to make live decisions on it in terms of, because it takes in farm cover, it takes in intakes, it takes the whole lot into it, and it allows you to plan it out a little bit better. Okay. So again, there's plenty of help there. There's videos. Michal O'Leary there from PastureBase has done videos on the grass budgets. Okay, and they're all in the help center. Again, I'm really certain that video is there. And or if not, just go YouTube and go PastureBase, the PastureBase account on YouTube, and just put in how to complete a grass budget or a feed budget, and it should be there. Over to you, John.
Perfect, Joe. Share the screen here. So we're just on the account here. So what we just want to do is just show you where to add the soil sample. So this is not going to take too long. Obviously, a huge part of growing more grass, a huge part of holding ryegrass in your swards and holding that grass quality, that better sward composition, is soil fertility. A huge part of fertilizer efficiency is soil fertility. It's a pretty core thing when it comes to grassland management. And PastureBase, because of that, PastureBase has added a function here on the left hand side. You can see soil tests, where farmers can actually add in the soil tests on their farm. Okay, so there's a couple of ways of doing it, and it actually doesn't take that long at all, especially when you have your sheet in front of you with all your paddocks and what their indexes are. So there's a couple of ways. If you have got soil samples done through FBA or Dairygold, you can go and click into manage soil test, and you can select the lab there. You can actually select it for IAS and Carlo as well, but it doesn't come through automatically. I'll explain in a second. So Dairygold or FBA, I suppose if you're a dairy farmer, you can put in your co-op or supplier number and continue, and that will create a link between you and who did your tests, and that will populate PastureBase automatically, and it'll let you know. You just need to, it'll give you the soil test, but you have to correlate it then to which paddocks that they're for. Okay, so it's pretty simple. IAS, then you can link up with them, and they will send you an email to your own email address in an Excel file, and basically you can import that Excel file onto PastureBase through this button here. You can import that file. So if you're not using any of those places for soil tests, well, then you're back to the good old-fashioned manual way of adding soil tests, but it's fairly straightforward. Okay, so you can just select a paddock here. And now maybe depending on your paddock size, I'm going to take it that most paddocks probably have their own soil sample, even on slightly smaller paddocks. Farmers like to know what every paddock is like, rather than Maybe if a paddock is split into A and B, it might be under the one soil type, or soil test. So we can just select paddock 1. We can select the date. So we say it was the 10th of January, and the soil pH. So you're just going to read off your soil test report, okay? And we'll say that your P is 9 milligrams per liter. So that's what you're filling there, is the milligrams per liter. You're not putting in what index it's in. And we'll say your K is 130, okay? There's a few other things. If you have other information on your soil test report, you can add them in as well, but these are the main ones. So you can just click save and add new. So we select paddock 2, soil test date, we'll leave it the same. Soil pH, we'll say this one is 5.9. We'll say the P is 3, and we'll say 75 for K. Save and add new. So literally, like, it's very quick. Once you have your soil test in front of you, you'll get through this pretty quickly. And this is the way they start to show up then on your screen. Okay, so there's no real point in me going through all of them. If you've added one of them, you can add 100 of them. So it's pretty straightforward. And again, probably on the back of this, it's good to have a plan for the year for fertilizer, and that's what we're going to be touching on tomorrow, is actually creating, I suppose, looking at recording fertilizer and recording slurry, and a bit on clover as well. So more the nutrient management side of things, of how can we sort of get better at managing the nutrients on the farm so we're getting the most out of them and making the most money off them as well. So if I just go, I'll stop sharing for a second there. I'm just going to bring up a soil test report. Now, there's a soil test report, and once you have your soil tests in, once you've done your measuring for the year, and once you recorded fertilizer, this report incorporates them all into one. Okay, so I'm just going to go here. So we're going to go to the sample
John,
here.
just a quick question there as well. That's after coming in there from Joe.
Yeah.
How do you put in the soil samples if you've 2 paddocks in the one sample?
In the 2 paddocks in the one sample.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that goes back. I'm not going to add a soil. If I added one in here, basically you could just tick the 2 paddocks. Is that
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can just tick the 2 paddocks and save them as that. Okay. So as I was saying, there is soil test report button here. So this farmer here that we used back in December to go through looking back over the year on the performance with William Dennehy, we were looking through some of this stuff again for him. So we thought we'd just bring it back up again just to show people what benefit it is. So I've selected last year. So basically here's your list of paddocks. That's their area, the soil test date. And I think Willie was even talking about back in December, he was going to get more soil tests done. So he probably has more up-to-date ones than what's here. He's very adamant on soil testing every year. And that's been key, he says, to the reason why there's so many good indexes there is through soil sampling and having a good targeted plan for that. So you can see here the total nitrogen spread on every paddock, the total phosphorus, K, sulfur, lime, and the number of grazings per paddock and the number of silage cuts per paddock and what the paddocks grew. Okay, so and you can actually click here. If you click the top of the column there as well, you can see which paddocks have grown the most. So you can see here the top 7 or 8 paddocks here are all optimum for soil fertility. Whereas if you go from the bottom, some of the lower paddocks, you can see there's more blue and white color there, which means there's more lower soil indexes, and they're at the lower end of things. Okay, so it just goes to show you the trend. It's not to say that every paddock that has good soil fertility is going to outgrow every poor paddock. It doesn't really work that way. There's different factors at play. So it's more to do with a trend. Okay, and the better soil fertility, the more grass you can grow, and the better soil fertility, the better job you're going to do at getting clover on farms as well. Okay, so if I just stop sharing there for a second. So I just want to go into the maps. Is there any questions there, Joe, while I'm just doing this?
No, I think you have everything answered so far now. Just let me check.
I just had a
You
question
keep
then,
going
Joe. Like
ahead if you want.
sometimes we get like, which one should farmers use? Should they use, the budget, or should they use the spring rotation planner? Like, which one is better? Should farmers just pick one and use one of them, or what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, look at it's probably coming down to maybe if you're very new to pasture base this year, maybe try and start off with a spring rotation planner and stick with that. But if you want to, again, as I said, it's maybe for the more A+ user and the person who maybe is more familiar with pasture base, maybe to try if you're that little bit higher stocked and use a grass budget, okay? Because it is more of a it's more like there's more information on it. You will get more out of it. Whereas the rotation planner on its own is pretty much just dates and how much grazing you should do by a date, but it doesn't take in the live thing of what weather can be, what soil conditions can be in a typical spring, and what growth
Yeah.
rates can be, which the grass budget does. So
Okay. So the just on we say for Willie's farm here, if you go back into the farm mapping area, you can click on fertility. So there's fertilizer. We go to fertility, and it'll come up on the pH there, where the soil fertility report basically. Now you can untick pH and go to P, or you can untick the two of them and go to K, and it will give you basically a soil map for your farm. So again, you can have the name or tick the area, or clover or whatever it is. So it's very handy. And then if we just go to export PDF outline, then so people can go to get a map printed out of their soil tests, and as that's showing the P there. So it's you might have to zoom in a little bit, or maybe you have to break the farm up into two really to get all the information on it. But I have it all there, and basically export to PDF and get it printed out for themselves.
it's probably nearly more there, John, at just maybe printing a pH map on its own first, because the colors come up on it. And then if you want, start with the lineman and making a lineman plan, because as you know as well as I do, and many of the big number of people that are on today's call, what can happen with soil samples an awful lot is they're taken, the result comes back, there's a big pile of paper on a desk, and next thing they're pegged into a corner of a room or on top of a pile of paper that's already there, and they're not acted on. Where I think, to be honest, if you put them into PastureBase and maybe even start off with the very simple one in terms of the lineman, put that up to, print off that PDF, that has the color coded in terms of, what area needs lime in 2023, and stick it up in your dairy, or stick it up in your, above in your yard, in, maybe on your farm, or stick it up in your office, in your house, or wherever you have. And that every time you walk past, you're kind of thinking to yourself, right, okay, when is my first chance to get lime out this year, so it's because some people in general, people learn things and people take things in different ways, and some people are a lot more visual than others. People like to look at maps, they like to see color coded things, where some people like looking at data on a page. But in general, I think farmers, when they see that color coded map, they think, right, I need to act on that this year. And it can be a good tool to have.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Do you want to just show the grazing courses there, John, again?
Yeah.
Before John, yeah, go on ahead.
Yeah, so just as part, I suppose, of what we do in Grass10 is we run grazing courses. So for anyone who wasn't here the last couple of days, we have Grass10 grazing courses running around the country for the last 4 years, and we've been helping farmers measure grass and using PastureBase Ireland to improve the amount of grass they're growing, improve the quality of the grass they're growing, helping them get clover onto their farms and manage it well. and helping them to reduce their fertilizer use and be more efficient with fertilizer. No one wants to be wasting it from an economical and environmental point of view. No one really wants to be wasting it. So if you're really serious about getting better at grassland management, you really probably should be considering joining the Grass10 course, because we run courses around the country with local advisors. So we have local knowledge and the expert knowledge from Grass10. We meet on farm. It's very practical. So we're not meeting like over Zoom or something. We meet on farm because grazing management has to be taught out in the field where it's going on. We need to be on the playing pitch. So we work in groups with groups of farmers. We print off group reports so where everyone has their figures. We look at the different, I suppose, grazing strategies, in terms of paddock setup, layout, infrastructure, and also bigger grassland management, things like soil fertility, and then really honing in on, getting the most out of every blade of grass, I suppose, on your farm, and being efficient with your fertilizer. So we meet about 6 to 8 times per year, and you're getting great exposure to the likes of ourselves, who've been working with groups for the last 4 years, and with other farmers who are like-minded in your area. So if you're interested, this sounds something like you'd be interested in, we would really love to work with you, and you can just express your interest here. Just leave your name, address, email, etc. here on the sheet. So to get into this is just go onto the Teagasc website, go to the Grass10 section. It comes under crops. You can just see Grass10 there. And if you go onto grazing courses here on the side, this is how you come into this page, and you can sign up. We will get back to you. It'll probably be a couple of weeks before we get back to you, because we've this week to get out of the way, and we're gonna leave it run for a week or two to build up a few names, and then we'll start contacting people. So yeah, if you want to do your best on grazing management this year, we'd love to work with you, and so please sign up.
Great stuff, John. Well, sure, look, we'll just to remind everyone that we're day 4. Tomorrow is the last day, John. So our topic for Friday's webinar is fertilizer and slurry recording and clover management. Okay, so we're moving on to another step on in terms of maybe to get we want to see people maybe giving clover a go on their farm maybe the last year or two, in terms of showing them how to record that. But also the huge area, look at, you all know about the input prices over the last few years, and we want to make better use of nitrogen in P and K, and we also want to make better use of slurries on the farm as well, and farmyard manure. So by recording, myself and John would hope that everybody on the call here would make a good stab at recording all the fertilizer and slurry that they're going to apply this year per paddock. Because if I was to ask you an awful lot, do you know what paddock 1 got on the farm last year, paddock 2 got on the farm? No, and you haven't been recording. You'll have a guess based on what the total tonnage of nitrogen and total tonnage of fertilizer that was used on the farm in total, but you wouldn't know if you're not recording it. Okay, so that's what the main focus is tomorrow, is going to be in getting 12 months data on your farm. And then for 2024, then you will know then, okay, I'm going to try and reduce that by 10%. Okay, and I'm going to maybe be a bit more economically within over the summertime or whatever. So we'd leave it at that, and we'll see you again for the last day of PastureBase week tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.